The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge as Martha Whitmore stepped down from the stagecoach, her simple brown dress already gathering the fine prairie dust that seemed to cover everything in this remote Wyoming territory. She clutched her worn leather satchel close to her chest, the weight of her few possessions a reminder of how little she had left in this world. At 28, most folks considered her well past marriageable age. But that wasn't what had brought her shame back in Missouri. It was Dr. Henderson's words that still echoed in her mind like a curse. "I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore, but you'll never bear children. The fever damaged you too badly." Those words had sealed her fate when they reached the ears of Thomas Brennan, the man who'd been courting her through letters for 6 months. His response had been swift and brutal. "I need a wife who can give me sons to work my land. A barren woman is of no use to me." The whole town had whispered about poor Martha Whitmore, the schoolteacher who couldn't even fulfill a woman's most basic duty. The shame had driven her west, following a newspaper advertisement for a teaching position in Cedar Ridge, Wyoming territory. Cedar Ridge wasn't much to look at. Perhaps 60 buildings scattered along the single main street, with the promise of growth that all frontier towns carried but few delivered. The saloon stood at one end like a crooked tooth, while the general store anchored the other end with its freshly painted sign. Between them sat the blacksmith shop, the doctor's office, 2 boarding houses, and a scattering of smaller establishments that served the ranchers and homesteaders scattered across the vast territory. Martha had barely taken 3 steps toward the boarding house when a small figure darted across her path, nearly knocking her satchel from her hands. A boy of perhaps 10 years old skidded to a stop in the dust, his clothes torn and his face streaked with dirt and tears. "Sorry, ma'am," the boy mumbled, trying to duck away, but Martha's gentle hand on his shoulder stopped him. "What's your name, son?" she asked, kneeling to meet his eyes. They were the brightest blue she'd ever seen, though currently filled with pain. "Billy Morrison," he whispered, glancing nervously toward the saloon where angry voices could be heard even from the street. "And what is you running through town like the devil himself is chasing you?" Billy's lower lip trembled. "Pa's in there drinking again. When he gets like that, he says things. Mean things about Mama being gone and how we're nothing but burdens now." Before Martha could respond, the saloon doors burst open and a man stumbled out, his face flushed with anger and whiskey. "Billy Morrison, you get back here right now." The man's voice carried the dangerous edge of someone who'd been drinking since sunrise. The boy pressed closer to Martha, and she found herself standing protectively in front of him as the man approached. James Morrison was tall and lean, probably handsome when he wasn't consumed by grief and alcohol. His dark hair hung unkempt around his face, and his clothes bore the stains of someone who'd given up caring about appearances. "Sir, perhaps you should go home and sleep this off," Martha said firmly, keeping her voice calm despite her racing heart. James Morrison's bloodshot eyes focused on her with difficulty. "And who might you be to tell me what to do with my own son? I'm Martha Whitmore, the new school teacher, and this child is frightened." "This child," James spat, "is the reason my wife is dead. Her and his sisters both. Sarah died bringing his youngest sister into this world, and now I'm left with 3 mouths to feed and no heart left to do it." The cruelty of his words made Martha's stomach clench, but she kept her voice steady. "Sir, that's no way to speak in front of the boy. Don't you tell me how to raise my children, woman. You don't know nothing about what it's like to lose everything that matters." Martha's jaw tightened. She knew more about loss than this broken man could imagine, but that wasn't what mattered now. "I know what it's like to watch children suffer when the adults around them forget their duty." For a moment something flickered in James Morrison's eyes, surprise perhaps or shame. But the whiskey won out, and he grabbed Billy's arm roughly. "Come on, boy. Your sisters need tending." As father and son walked away, Martha noticed how Billy looked back over his shoulder at her, those blue eyes pleading for help she couldn't yet give. She watched until they disappeared around the corner, then picked up her satchel and continued toward the boarding house, her mind already working on a problem she hadn't expected to face on her first day in Cedar Ridge. Mrs. Eleanor Hodges ran the boarding house with the efficiency of a military commander and the warmth of a grandmother. She was a sturdy woman in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Martha's simple dress and worn shoes and quoted a price that was fair without being charitable. "You'll be wanting the room on the second floor," Mrs. Hodges said as she led Martha up the narrow stairs. "Gets good morning light, which I figure a school teacher needs for reading and such. Breakfast is at 6, dinner at 6. No men in the rooms, no drinking, and no loud noises after 9 o'clock. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a desk by the window that looked out over the main street. Martha set down her satchel and moved to the window, where she could see the school building at the far end of town, a simple wooden structure that looked like it had been built with more hope than skill. "Mrs. Hodges," Martha said as the older woman turned to leave, "what can you tell me about the Morrison family?" Mrs. Hodges paused in the doorway, her expression growing sad. "Tragedy, that one. James Morrison came here 5 years ago with his wife Sarah and little Billy. Good people, hard-working. James built up a nice spread about 3 miles out of town, and Sarah was the sweetest woman you ever did meet. Then the children started coming." She leaned against the door frame, her voice growing softer. "First was little Emma. She's 8 now. Pretty as a picture with her mother's blonde hair. Then came Lucy, who's just turned 6. Sarah had trouble with that birth, but she pulled through. The doctor warned her against having another baby, but when does the Lord ever ask our opinion on such matters?" Martha sat down on the bed, already dreading the rest of the story. "Baby Catherine was born this past winter," Mrs. Hodges continued. "Sarah fought for 3 days to bring her into this world, and the effort killed her. James hasn't been the same since. Takes to drinking most days now, leaves those children to fend for themselves more often than not. It's a scandal, really, but what can we do? They're his children. What about other family? Sarah's people are back in Ohio, and James never talks about his kin. Far as anyone knows, those 3 children have nobody but their father, and he's drowning in his own grief." That evening, Martha walked through the town as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She found the Morrison place easily enough, a small farmhouse with a sagging porch and windows that needed cleaning. Smoke rose from the chimney, and she could hear the faint sound of children's voices from inside. She knocked on the door, and after a long moment, it opened to reveal a little girl with tangled blonde hair and a dress that had once been white but was now gray with wear. This had to be Emma, the 8-year-old. "Is your father home?" Martha asked gently. Emma shook her head. "He's in town. Won't be back till late, probably." "May I come in? I'm the new school teacher." Emma's eyes widened with interest, but she glanced nervously over her shoulder. "Billy says we're not supposed to let strangers in." "Billy's very smart," Martha agreed. "But teachers aren't exactly strangers, are they? We're sort of like temporary family." That seemed to satisfy Emma, who stepped back to let Martha enter. The inside of the house told a story of neglect and struggle. Dirty dishes were stacked in the wash basin, clothes lay scattered on chairs, and the smell of something burning hung in the air. "Oh dear," Martha said, hurrying to the stove where a pot of beans was starting to scorch. She pulled it from the heat and stirred it carefully, managing to save most of the meal. Billy appeared from a back room, carrying a baby who couldn't have been more than 8 months old. Little Catherine was beautiful despite her obvious hunger, with her mother's blonde hair and her father's blue eyes. "You came back," Billy said, his voice filled with wonder. I said I was the new school teacher, didn't I? It's my job to look after the children in this town. A third small figure peeked out from behind Billy. This had to be Lucy, the 6-year-old. She was tiny for her age, with enormous blue eyes that held too much worry for someone so young. "Are you going to teach us to read?" Emma asked hopefully. "Mama was teaching us before she went to heaven." Martha's heart clenched. "Of course I am. That's what teachers do." She spent the next hour helping the children eat their supper, listening to their chatter about their mother and their life before everything changed. Emma was clearly the little mother of the group, trying desperately to keep the family together. Billy carried anger like a weight on his shoulders, old beyond his years. Lucy barely spoke, but her eyes followed Martha's every movement with desperate hope. Baby Catherine fussed constantly, and Martha soon realized why. The child was hungry, but there was no milk in the house, and no sign that James had arranged for any. "How has the baby been eating?" Martha asked carefully. Billy's face flushed with embarrassment. "Pa, he tries to feed her bread soaked in water, but she doesn't like it much. Mrs. Henderson down the road has been helping some, but she has her own family to worry about," Martha finished. "I understand." She held Catherine while the older children finished their supper, and the baby gradually stopped fussing, perhaps sensing the competent care of someone who knew how to hold an infant properly. When James Morrison finally stumbled home near midnight, he found Martha Whitmore asleep in his chair by the fire, baby Catherine peaceful in her arms, and the 3 older children clean and sleeping in their beds. For a long moment he stood in the doorway, swaying slightly from the whiskey, staring at a scene he hadn't witnessed since Sarah died. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice rough. Martha opened her eyes slowly, careful not to wake the baby. "Your children needed care. I didn't ask for your help." "No," Martha agreed, standing carefully. "But they did. Maybe not in words, but children have ways of asking that don't require speech." James Morrison looked at his sleeping children, really looked at them, for what felt like the first time in months. Emma's hair was braided neatly, Lucy's face was clean, and Billy's torn shirt had been mended. The house smelled of the bread Martha had baked after the children went to sleep, and the dishes were clean and stacked neatly on the shelves. "I don't need charity," he said, but there was less fight in his voice now. "This isn't charity," Martha replied firmly. "This is what neighbors do for neighbors, what people do for children who need help." She moved toward the door, but James's voice stopped her. "The baby, Catherine, she's been sick lately. Won't eat much." Martha turned back to face him. "She needs milk, Mr. Morrison, real milk, not bread and water, and she needs regular feeding times. Babies require routine." "I know what babies need," he snapped, but the anger seemed hollow now. "I had 2 others before her." "Then you know that Catherine won't survive much longer without proper care." The brutal honesty of her words hit him like a physical blow. James Morrison sank into the chair Martha had vacated, his head in his hands. "I don't know how to do this without Sarah," he whispered. "She was the one who knew about babies and children and making a house into a home. I can work the land. I can fix what's broken. But this, I'm failing them, aren't I?" Martha studied the broken man before her. She'd seen grief before, had lived with it herself after losing first her parents and then her hopes for a family of her own. But this man's grief was destroying more than just himself. "You're not failing them yet," she said quietly. "But you will if you don't make some changes soon." She left him sitting there in the dark, staring at the dying embers of the fire, while she walked back to town under a canopy of stars. Behind her, in the little farmhouse, 3 children slept peacefully for the first time in months, and a man began to understand what he stood to lose if he couldn't find his way back from the bottom of a whiskey bottle. The next morning, Martha opened the school to find 7 children waiting outside, including Billy, Emma, and Lucy Morrison. James Morrison stood at the edge of the schoolyard, baby Catherine in his arms, watching his children with something that might have been hope starting to flicker in his red-rimmed eyes. "Good morning, class," Martha called out, unlocking the school door. "Let's begin." As the children filed inside, chattering excitedly about their new teacher, Martha caught James Morrison's eye and nodded slightly. He nodded back, the first communication they'd shared that wasn't born of anger or desperation. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. And Martha Whitmore, the woman who'd been told she was too broken to build a family of her own, began to understand that sometimes families found each other in the most unexpected ways, in the most unlikely places, when the need was great enough and the heart was willing to try. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of snow from the distant mountains, but inside the little schoolhouse, warmth began to grow. The kind of warmth that comes not from a fire, but from hope taking root in previously barren ground. 3 weeks into the school term, Martha had established routines that the Morrison children clung to like anchors in a storm. Every morning, Billy would arrive early to help her start the fire in the pot-bellied stove, while Emma swept the classroom floor with the dedication of someone who understood that order brought comfort. Lucy still spoke little, but she had begun bringing Martha small gifts: wildflowers, smooth stones, once a butterfly wing that had caught her eye. The other children in Cedar Ridge had initially viewed the Morrison siblings with a mixture of pity and wariness. Everyone knew their story, and frontier communities had a way of marking families that were struggling. But Martha's firm hand and gentle guidance gradually wove the Morrison children back into the fabric of childhood normalcy. "Miss Whitmore," asked Jenny Patterson, a freckled 9-year-old whose father ran the general store, "why doesn't Lucy talk much?" They were working on arithmetic problems, and Lucy had correctly solved hers but hadn't spoken a word all morning. Martha glanced at the little girl, who was carefully writing her numbers with a concentration that seemed to require her entire being. "Some people need more time to find their words," Martha said quietly. "That doesn't mean they have less to say." Lucy looked up then, her blue eyes meeting Martha's, and the ghost of a smile touched her lips. It was progress, small but significant. James Morrison had kept his word about staying sober during school hours, though Martha could tell the effort cost him dearly. He would drop the children off each morning, baby Catherine bundled in his arms, and his hands would shake slightly as he handed over the lunch pail Emma had packed. But he came every day and he stayed sober until evening, which was more than he'd managed in months. The turning point came on a Thursday afternoon when storm clouds gathered earlier than expected. Martha had dismissed school and was helping the children gather their belongings when she realized the Morrison children couldn't walk home in what was shaping up to be a dangerous storm. "We'll wait here until it passes," she decided, but Billy shook his head firmly. "Pa will worry. He expects us home by 4 o'clock every day now. If we're late—" Billy didn't finish the sentence, but Martha understood. James Morrison's fragile sobriety depended on routines, on knowing his children were safe. "Then I'll walk you home," Martha said, pulling on her cloak. The wind was already howling by the time they left the schoolhouse, and the first fat snowflakes began falling before they'd gone 100 yards. By the time they reached the Morrison farm, the snow was coming down in sheets that turned the world into a white blur. James Morrison met them at the door, his face wild with worry. "I was about to come looking for you," he said, pulling his children inside and counting them as if he couldn't quite believe they were all there. "The storm came up fast," Martha explained, stamping snow from her boots. "I thought it best to walk with them." "You can't go back to town in this," James said, looking out at the swirling snow. "Road's already getting covered and it'll be full dark soon." Martha looked around the small house, calculating space and propriety. "I'll sleep in the chair by the fire. It won't be the first time I've made do with less than ideal circumstances." "No," Emma said firmly, surprising everyone. "You can sleep in my bed. I'll sleep with Lucy like we used to when Mama was—" She stopped, her face flushing, but then continued with determination. "When Mama was here with baby Catherine." That night, as wind howled around the little farmhouse and snow piled against the windows, Martha found herself truly integrated into the Morrison family rhythm for the first time. She helped Emma prepare supper while Billy tended the fire, and Lucy played gently with baby Catherine. James disappeared into the barn to tend the animals, but when he came back, his eyes were clear and his hands steady. "Cattle are secure," he reported. "This storm should blow through by morning, but it's going to be a cold night." They ate together by lamplight, beans and cornbread and preserved peaches that Sarah Morrison had put up the summer before she died. James had been quiet during the meal, but as Martha helped Emma clear the dishes, he spoke up. "Miss Whitmore, I owe you an apology. The way I acted that first day, what I said about Billy and the girls, that wasn't right." Martha paused in her dishwashing. "Grief makes people say things they don't mean, Mr. Morrison." "Maybe so, but that doesn't excuse it." James looked at his son, who was carefully not listening while he whittled by the fire. "Billy's a good boy. They all are. Sarah would be ashamed of how I've been treating them." "Sarah would understand that you're hurting," Martha said gently. "But she'd want you to find your way back to them." Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed, Martha and James sat by the dying fire. The comfortable quiet broken only by the storm outside and baby Catherine's soft breathing from the makeshift cradle James had moved into the main room. "Tell me about your wife," Martha said softly. James was quiet for so long that Martha thought he might not answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and careful, as if the words might break if he said them too loudly. She was sunshine in human form, always laughing, always finding something good in every situation. When we came out here, most women would have taken one look at this place and demanded to go back home. Sarah rolled up her sleeves and said it was an adventure." He stared into the fire, his hands clasped tightly together. "She loved those children so much. Used to sing to them every night, make up stories about brave princesses and talking animals. Emma was just learning to read, and Sarah would have her sound out words from the Bible or from the few books we brought with us." "What happened to the books?" Martha asked. "They're still here, packed away because—" He swallowed hard. "Because it hurt too much to see them and remember." "The children need those stories," Martha said gently. "They need those connections to their mother." James nodded slowly. "I know. I've known all along, but knowing something and being able to act on it are different things when your heart feels like it's been torn in half." The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Martha woke to find James already up, making coffee and feeding baby Catherine a bottle of milk he'd somehow managed to procure. "Mrs. Henderson sent her oldest boy over at first light," he explained when he saw Martha's questioning look. "She's got a milk cow, and she said Catherine can have what she needs." It was a small thing, but Martha recognized it for what it was, a step toward engaging with the community again, toward accepting help instead of drowning in pride and grief. The children were excited by the snow, and after breakfast, Martha found herself outside helping them build a snowman, while James watched from the porch, baby Catherine bundled in his arms. Emma's laughter rang out clear and bright as Billy packed snow for the snowman's middle section. And even Lucy smiled as she carefully placed stones for the snowman's eyes. "Higher, Miss Whitmore," Emma called out. "Make him taller." Martha was reaching up to place the snowman's head when her foot slipped on a patch of ice. She would have fallen hard if James Morrison hadn't suddenly been there, his strong arm around her waist, steadying her. For a moment, they stood very close, both breathing hard from the surprise. Martha could see the flecks of gold in James's blue eyes, could smell the scent of wood smoke that clung to his clothes. She was acutely aware of his hand on her waist, of the strength in his arm that held her safe. "Careful," he said softly, his voice rough. "Thank you," she whispered back, and neither of them moved for a heartbeat longer than necessary. It was Emma's delighted giggle that broke the spell. "Papa caught Miss Whitmore," she announced to her siblings, as if this was the most wonderful thing she'd ever seen. James stepped back quickly, his face flushing red. "The ice is slippery," he said awkwardly. "Can't have the schoolteacher breaking her neck in my yard." But something had shifted between them in that moment, some awareness that hadn't been there before. Martha felt it like a flutter in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the winter sun. The next few weeks fell into a pattern that felt almost like normalcy. Martha would arrive at the Morrison farm most evenings after school, ostensibly to help with the children's lessons, but really because the family had begun to feel like her family. She helped Emma with reading, worked with Billy on his arithmetic, and spent patient hours encouraging Lucy to speak. The little girl's breakthrough came on a cold Tuesday evening in February. Martha was reading aloud from one of Sarah Morrison's rescued books, a collection of fairy tales that James had finally brought down from the attic. Lucy was sitting close beside her, following along with the pictures, when she suddenly spoke. "The princess looks like Mama," Lucy said softly, pointing to an illustration of a woman with long blonde hair. The room went completely still. It was the first time Lucy had mentioned her mother directly since Sarah's death. "She does," Martha agreed gently. "Your mama must have been very beautiful." "She was," Emma said eagerly, seizing the chance to talk about the mother she missed so desperately. "And she smelled like flowers, and she made the best apple pie in the whole territory." "Tell me more," Martha encouraged, and for the next hour, the children shared memories of their mother while James listened from his chair by the fire, tears streaming silently down his face. It was Billy who finally asked the question that had been building in all their hearts. "Miss Whitmore, do you think Mama would like you?" Martha looked at the three earnest faces turned toward her, at James Morrison, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I hope so," she said honestly. "I'd very much like to think that she and I would have been friends." "I think she would have loved you," Emma said with the certainty of childhood, "because you take care of us like she did." Later that evening, after the children were asleep, James walked Martha back to town under a canopy of winter stars. They'd made this walk together dozens of times now, but tonight felt different, charged with unspoken possibilities. "Martha," James said suddenly, stopping in the middle of the path, "I need to say something." She turned to face him, her heart beginning to pound. "What is it?" "These past weeks, having you with us, it's been like watching my family come back to life. The children laugh again. They're learning again. And He stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I haven't had a drink in 3 weeks. Not since that first storm when you stayed over." "James, I know what people say about me," he continued. "I know what a mess I've made of things. And I know you probably have other plans for your life, other places you want to go. But I need you to know that you've given us something I thought we'd lost forever. You've given us hope." Martha felt tears prick her eyelids. "You've given me something too," she said softly. "I came here thinking I was broken, thinking I had nothing to offer anyone. But your children, they've shown me that there are many ways to be a mother, many ways to build a family." They stood there in the snow, two broken people who had somehow found a way to heal each other, while the wind whispered through the pine trees and the future stretched out before them like an unwritten story, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Back at the Morrison farm, 3 children lay in their beds, whispering to each other in the darkness. Do you think Papa likes Miss Whitmore? Emma asked. I think he more than likes her, Billy said sagely. I think he loves her. Good, Lucy said firmly, surprising her siblings with her vehemence. Because I want her to be our real mama. And in the main room, baby Catherine slept peacefully in her cradle, dreaming whatever dreams babies dream, while outside the wind carried the scent of spring that was still months away, but somehow felt closer than it had in a very long time. Spring arrived early in Cedar Ridge that year, bringing with it changes that no one could have anticipated. The snow melted in great rushing streams that turned the roads to mud and filled the air with the sound of water finding its way back to the earth. With the warming weather came news that would shake the small community to its core. Martha was working in the school garden with her students, teaching them about planting and growing, when Mrs. Hodges appeared at the school gate, her face pale and her hands wringing her apron. Miss Whitmore, you need to come quickly. There's news. Martha looked at her students, then at Billy Morrison, whose face had gone white as fresh snow. Children, continue with the planting. Billy, you're in charge. I'll be right back. She followed Mrs. Hodges to the boarding house, where a well-dressed woman sat in the parlor, her traveling dress dusty from the road, but her bearing unmistakably that of someone accustomed to authority. Miss Whitmore, this is Mrs. Eleanor Patterson from the Territorial Education Board, Mrs. Hodges said, her voice tight with worry. The woman stood, extending a gloved hand. Miss Whitmore, I've been sent to conduct an evaluation of your teaching position. There have been concerns raised about your methods and your personal conduct. Martha's stomach dropped, but she kept her voice steady. What sort of concerns? Mrs. Patterson consulted a leather portfolio. Reports have reached our office that you've been spending inappropriate amounts of time at the home of a local widower, sometimes staying overnight. There are also questions about your prioritizing certain students over others, specifically the Morrison children. Who made these reports? Martha asked, though she suspected she already knew. Mrs. Constance Bradley, wife of the town's banker. She wrote to express her concerns about the moral character of Cedar Ridge's teacher and the example being set for the children. Martha closed her eyes briefly. Constance Bradley had made her disapproval clear from the beginning, particularly after Martha had refused to dismiss the Morrison children from school during James's worst drinking period. The woman had a sharp tongue and strong opinions about how a proper school teacher should conduct herself. Mrs. Patterson, I can explain every situation Mrs. Bradley referenced. My presence at the Morrison home has always been for the welfare of the children. Miss Whitmore, Mrs. Patterson interrupted. I'm not here to debate the merits of your actions. I'm here to inform you that effective immediately, you're being transferred to a school in Denver, a more supervised environment where you can develop proper professional boundaries. The words hit Martha like a physical blow. When? You have 1 week to conclude your affairs here. The stagecoach will take you to Denver next Friday. After Mrs. Patterson left, Martha sat in the empty parlor, staring at her hands and trying to process what had just happened. 1 week. 7 days to say goodbye to the life she'd built, to the children who had become her world, to the man who had begun to fill the empty spaces in her heart. She returned to school to find her students still working in the garden, but Billy Morrison was sitting apart from the others, his young face etched with worry. Miss Whitmore, what's wrong? You look like someone died. Martha knelt beside him, choosing her words carefully. Billy, sometimes adults make decisions that affect children, and those decisions aren't always fair or easy to understand. You're leaving, aren't you? His blue eyes filled with tears he was too proud to shed. I have to go to Denver. The education board says I'm needed there. Billy's face crumpled. But you can't leave. Who's going to help Emma with her reading? Who's going to make Lucy feel safe? Who's going to... He stopped, swallowing hard. Who's going to take care of us? Your father takes care of you, Billy. He loves you very much. But he needs you too. We all need you. Billy's voice cracked with desperation. You can't just go away like Mama did. The raw pain in his voice nearly broke Martha's resolve. She pulled the boy into her arms, holding him tight while he sobbed against her shoulder. That evening, Martha walked to the Morrison farm for what she thought might be the last time. The children sensed something was wrong the moment she arrived. Lucy clung to her skirts. Emma's chatter was forced and nervous. And Billy wouldn't look at her directly. James took one look at her face and quietly asked, "What's happened?" They waited until after the children were asleep to talk, sitting by the fire as they had so many evenings before. When Martha explained about the education board and her transfer to Denver, James listened without interruption, his jaw growing tighter with each word. "Constance Bradley," he said finally, his voice harsh with anger. "That woman has been spreading poison about you since the day you arrived. She thinks any woman who doesn't conform to her narrow ideas of propriety is a threat to decent society." "It doesn't matter who made the complaint," Martha said quietly. "What matters is that I have to go." James stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "What if you didn't have to go? What if you had a reason to stay that even the education board couldn't argue with?" Martha looked at him, her heart beginning to race. "What do you mean?" He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his work-roughened ones. "Marry me, Martha. Be my wife. Be their mother. Stay with us." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and fear. Martha felt tears sliding down her cheeks as she looked into James's earnest face. "James, you don't understand. I'm not able to give you children of your own. The doctor back in Missouri told me—" "I don't care," James said fiercely. "I don't need children of my own when I have 3 who already love you like their own mother. Martha, these past months with you have been the happiest my children have been since Sarah died. And He swallowed hard. "I love you. Not because you can replace Sarah, no one could do that, but because you're you. Because you've brought light back into our dark places." Martha wanted to say yes more than she'd ever wanted anything in her life, but the fears that had driven her from Missouri rose up like ghosts. What if you change your mind? What if someday you decide you want sons to carry on your name? Then we'll pray that Billy grows up to be the kind of man worth carrying on the Morrison name, James said simply. "Martha, I'm not asking you to be Sarah. I'm asking you to be yourself, the woman who saved my family when I was too lost in grief to save them myself." Before Martha could respond, a small voice spoke from the doorway. "Miss Whitmore, are you really going away?" They turned to see Lucy standing in her nightgown. Her blonde hair tousled from sleep and her blue eyes wide with fear. "Lucy, sweetheart, you should be in bed," Martha said gently. "I heard you and Papa talking. You can't go away. Please don't go away." Emma appeared behind her sister, then Billy, all 3 children clustering in the doorway in their nightclothes, watching the adults with expressions of desperate hope and fear. "Come here, all of you," James said softly. The children approached slowly, uncertainty written in every line of their small bodies. Emma climbed into Martha's lap while Lucy pressed against her side, and Billy stood close to his father's chair. "Miss Whitmore has been offered a teaching position in Denver," James explained carefully. "She has to decide whether to take it or whether to stay here with us." "Stay," Lucy said immediately, her voice stronger than Martha had ever heard it. "Please stay." "But why would she stay?" Emma asked, her 8-year-old mind working through the problem. "She's not really our family." "She could be," Billy said quietly, looking directly at Martha. "She could be our mama if she married Papa." The simple truth of it, spoken by a 10-year-old boy, made Martha's breath catch. Emma's face lit up. "Really? Miss Whitmore could be our real mama?" Only if she wants to, James said, his eyes never leaving Martha's face. Only if she chooses us. Lucy scrambled up into Martha's lap beside Emma, her small hands framing Martha's face. Do you want to be our mama? Please say yes. Please stay. Martha looked around at the four faces watching her with such hope, such desperate love, and felt the last of her fears crumble away. These children didn't care that she couldn't bear babies of her own. They needed a mother who could love the ones who already existed. James didn't need her to replace his first wife. He needed a partner who could help him build a new kind of happiness. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, I want to be your mama. Yes, I want to stay. The explosion of joy from the children nearly knocked her from the chair. Emma and Lucy threw their arms around her neck, while Billy launched himself at both her and his father, and baby Catherine, awakened by the noise, began crying from her cradle. As James scooped up the baby and Martha held his other children close, she felt a peace settle over her that she'd never experienced before. This was what family felt like. Not perfect, not without struggles, but full of love and hope and the promise of tomorrow. The next morning, James Morrison walked into town with determination in his stride and purpose in his eyes. He found Mrs. Eleanor Patterson at the boarding house, preparing for her return journey to Denver. Mrs. Patterson, I need to speak with you about Miss Whitmore's transfer. The woman looked up from her packing, her expression cool. Mr. Morrison, isn't it? I'm afraid the decision has already been made. Then it needs to be unmade. Miss Whitmore won't be going to Denver. And why is that? Because she's going to be my wife. We're getting married this Sunday. Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose. How convenient. And I suppose this sudden engagement has nothing to do with her transfer orders? James met her gaze steadily. Ma'am, I've been planning to ask Miss Whitmore to marry me for weeks. The only thing your transfer did was force me to ask sooner rather than later. Mr. Morrison, even if Miss Whitmore marries you, there's still the question of her professional conduct. A married woman with children to care for cannot be expected to maintain a teaching position. Then you'll need to find Cedar Ridge a new teacher, James said calmly. Because Miss Whitmore has more important work to do, raising 3 children who need her and building a family with a man who loves her. When Martha arrived at school that morning, she found the children already gathered in the yard, buzzing with excitement. Word had spread through the small community with the speed of wildfire. The school teacher was marrying James Morrison, and there would be a wedding on Sunday. Miss Whitmore, Jenny Patterson called out. Is it true? Are you really going to be Billy's mama? And Emma's, added another child. And Lucy's too, finished a third. Martha smiled, looking at the Morrison children who stood together, watching her with pride and joy radiating from their faces. Yes, she said simply, I'm going to be their mama and their papa's wife. The wedding took place 3 days later in the little church at the end of Main Street. Martha wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Hodges had helped her alter, and she carried wildflowers that Lucy had picked that morning. James wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed for the occasion, and his face glowed with happiness as he watched his bride walk down the aisle. Emma and Lucy served as flower girls, scattering petals with serious concentration. While Billy stood beside his father as best man, his chest puffed out with pride. Baby Catherine slept peacefully in Mrs. Hodges's arms, unaware that she was witnessing the moment her fractured family became whole again. When the preacher asked if anyone objected to the marriage, Constance Bradley half rose from her pew, her mouth open to speak. But her husband's firm hand on her arm and the collective glare of the entire community settled her back into her seat with her objections unspoken. You may kiss the bride, the preacher announced, and James Morrison kissed his new wife while their children cheered and the little church filled with laughter and joy. Later, at the celebration in the church hall, Martha stood watching her new family. James was talking with the other ranchers about spring planting. Baby Catherine was being passed from neighbor to neighbor like a small blessing, and the three older children were running among the tables with the other young ones, their faces bright with happiness. Billy appeared at her elbow, slightly out of breath from his games. "Mama Martha?" The title made her heart swell. "Yes, son? Are you happy? Really, truly happy?" Martha knelt down to meet his eyes, those bright blue eyes that had first captured her heart in a dusty street months ago. "Really, truly happy," she confirmed. "Are you?" Billy grinned, the carefree smile of a child who finally felt secure in his world. "Really, truly happy. And you know what the best part is?" "What?" "Now nobody can make you go away. You're stuck with us forever." Martha laughed, pulling him into a hug. "Stuck with you forever," she agreed. "And I can't think of anywhere else I'd rather be." As the sun set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Martha Morrison stood surrounded by her new family and felt the last empty spaces in her heart fill with love. She had come to Cedar Ridge as a broken woman with nothing to offer, only to discover that sometimes the most beautiful families are built not from what people can create together, but from what they can heal in each other. The woman who had been rejected as bare of children had found her calling as the mother of three beautiful souls who had needed her as much as she had needed them. And in a little farmhouse 3 miles from town, where love had learned to grow again after devastating loss, the Morrison family settled into their new life together, complete at last, and ready for whatever tomorrow might bring.